reason that I wanted to talk about antibiotics, or I guess dedicate an entire episode to antibiotics, because if you've been listening to my podcast for a long time, you know that I have briefly discussed antibiotics on other topics of other episodes, whether we're talking about gut health or the liver. But I kind of wanted to dedicate an entire episode to that today. So that's what we're going to do. And the reason for that is because at the beginning of the year, so early January, like a month ago now, I had to take antibiotics for the first time in 6 years. And it broke my heart to have to do that. I felt like, when, I just kept imagining like Monsters Inc. when they're like in the factory and it was like, it's like 0 days without an accident, but they have something else. But anyways, it just made me think of that, like all these days without antibiotics, and really kind of cleansing my body of antibiotics, because if you follow me, you also know that I was on antibiotics for like 10, 14 months because of my Lyme disease back in 2018, 2019. So I feel like, I finally got my gut to this really good, strong place. My digestion was healed. Everything was going well. And then I had to take antibiotics. So I was super, super upset about it. And the reason I had to take them is because I had a urinary tract infection, a UTI, which is super random for me, very random. The last time I had a UTI was 10 years ago. And that was the only time that I can recall that I ever had a UTI. And so it was super random that I had one. I was actually in a lot of pain, and they thought maybe I had like appendicitis or I had a kidney infection. So I had to get an ultrasound done of my appendix and my kidneys and everything, and everything looked fine. So they were like, yeah, it's just a UTI. And man, I did not want to take the antibiotics. Even when I was taking them, I just dreaded it because it brought me back to having Lyme disease and being on my 10th round, 12th round of antibiotics, not feeling any better. And so it was almost like this little PTSD moment for me. And it was like, oh my gosh, like I don't want to do this. I don't want to deal with everything that comes along with it. But, I had to remind myself that, one, I am only human. Like, just because I talk about nutrition and I know a lot about nutrition doesn't mean I have like superhuman powers to evade certain, infections or illnesses. Like I could get sick just like anybody else. I guess the thing is I don't really get sick too often. So for this to happen, I was like really, really bummed. And, but I reminded myself that I know so much more now than I did know. And I know how to recover and bounce back, and that I won't have to, go through a lot of what I went through. And obviously this is one round, so it's different. But, I see why it's easy to take the prescription medication for certain things. Like I see why people kind of will choose that, because holistic health, holistic modalities, they take a little bit longer to take hold, to have an impact on your health, right? You're dealing with something from nature. And again, most things in nature take time to heal and get better. It's not like this overnight thing. And I think as a society, we're so used to instant gratification and getting things now and not having to wait, that when we're in discomfort, we just want the drug. We just want to feel better now. And I think that discomfort kind of can apply to, physical discomfort, physical illness, as well as emotional discomfort. Think about like antidepressants, anxiety medication. How many people are on those today? And again, we don't, as humans, like to be uncomfortable. And so much of what it means to be human means to be uncomfortable at times. So I see why, people turn to pharmaceuticals, prescription medications over the natural route. And obviously, I will say, and I did do, funny thing is I did a post about antibiotics on my Instagram page, like 4 days before I had to start taking antibiotics. I was like, what are the odds of that? But I did point out that there is a time and place for antibiotics. Antibiotics do save lives. I'm not discounting that at all. I'm just saying that I do really believe that antibiotics are overprescribed and overused today, mostly. Like that's really what I think. And I've had friends who constantly had UTIs. It felt like they were on antibiotics every 2-3 months because they had another infection. And it's like, why wouldn't your doctor just be like, okay, you keep getting these. We need to figure out what's going on. Let's look at your lifestyle. Let's look at your nutrition. But most don't. They just keep prescribing it. So yeah, I see why, people don't want to do the holistic stuff because it's too much work. It's easy just to take the medication and be done with it. But really, is it really less work? Because eventually you're going to pay the price down the line, whether it's side effects or other impacts that it might have to your body. I think about, I was going to get into this later in the episode, but I guess I'll talk about it now. But with big pharma and pharmaceuticals, they really just kind of want you stuck in this system, right? So, for example, let's take the COVID shot, because that's actually been really on my mind right now, because Pfizer, Moderna, they created this vaccine. They give us all this vaccine. They're like, oh, it's safe. Take it. Well, now there's so much evidence of turbo cancers happening from people who got this vaccine. And if you're not familiar with this, I'm going to link some sources in the episode notes of different interviews and things that you can check out that also have references within those videos, so you can see the cases of turbo cancers. And it's basically people who, all of a sudden have just their body is riddled with stage 4 cancer all over. It's crazy. I mean, it's really sad too. And so then you have Pfizer. It's like, oh, well, you got our shot. Now you have cancer. Now you have to take, now you need chemo and you need all these other drugs to help you with your cancer. So you're stuck like in this cycle. And, Ozempic kind of reminds me of this too. It's like, you're fed unhealthy food from our corrupt food system, and you are addicted to that unhealthy food. So it's really hard for you to lose weight and get healthy because you can't shake the addiction to these heavily processed foods. Again, these foods are designed to be addictive. So now you're overweight, you're developing health problems because you're overweight, because you're eating these unhealthy foods. So then you're like, oh, well, I'm going to buy myself some Ozempic and I'm going to inject Ozempic. Oh, now I'm losing weight. Great. Well, now your body's deficient, you're losing your hair, you have other health problems. And so then you have to take drugs or medications to help counteract those side effects from the Ozempic. Obviously, there's, research and evidence that shows Ozempic can lead to cancer. So then eventually you may get cancer from the Ozempic, and then you're stuck in this big pharma loop because you need cancer treatment. And so it's all about being stuck in this loop. And it's like at some point we need to wake up and stop that cycle and get out of it. And I didn't have the words to articulate it in that way back in 2019 because I was finishing up my master's, and I had some of the words, but I wasn't as awake then as I am now. But in January of 2020, I finally was like, stop. I can't take these medications anymore. They're not helping me. I am not better off. Nothing is better. And I just stopped. I stopped going to my doctor. I was like, I have to figure this out on my own. And I just stopped. And so that's what we have to do, is at some point we have to stop the cycle of like having to be constantly stuck in the big pharma loop and get ourselves out of it, because no one's going to come to save us. We have to do it ourselves, and we have to have the willpower to do it ourselves. So that's my little like big pharma spiel about, being stuck in the loop of medications, as well as, kind of bringing it back to as people just wanting to have things done faster. Again, with Ozempic, you can lose weight faster without having to do the hard work, and so on with most drugs, and like I said, with holistic modalities and treatments and herbs and things, they just take a while. They take a little bit longer to take hold in your body. And like I know for me with the UTI, it was so weird. I went from 0 to 100. Like I woke up, I was fine, everything was great. Normal day, going about my juicing, doing my thing. Like again, I had used the bathroom already a few times that morning. And then one of the times I went, I was like, ooh, that was painful. That was weird. And I thought, okay, well maybe it's just like a fluke, like that doesn't normally happen. So maybe it's random. And then, a couple hours later it happened again. And I was with my mom at the time, and I was like, yeah, I might have a UTI or something. And she's like, oh, well, I have my stuff, because she used to get them. So she gave me her like D-mannose with cranberry, her grapefruit seed extract. I was drinking cranberry juice and pineapple juice and stuff. So I started taking all of that evening, but I just think it was maybe a little too late, because I gave it like 4 days to kick in. And I didn't think it was any worse. It wasn't any better, but I didn't think it was any worse. But then by the 4th day, I was in a lot of pain. And that's where the concern for a potential kidney infection kind of kicked in, because a UTI can, backs up into your kidneys and can become a kidney infection. And when I had a UTI 10 years ago, it was a kidney infection, and it was very painful. And so I went and saw my primary care physician, which I'm excited to say he's going to be on my podcast next week. So that's going to be a really fun episode. I'm excited to have a conversation with him. And the thing was, as much as I didn't want to take antibiotics, and he's pretty with it, he doesn't like to overprescribe antibiotics anymore. And he was saying, what's worse? Do you want to take the oral antibiotics, or do you want to try to continue, naturally, which is fine, but given the pain that you're in, you don't want a kidney infection to become really bad, and then you'll be in the hospital, and then you have to take antibiotics through an IV, which is 1,000 times worse. Like, they're both not great, but the lesser of the evils would be the capsules. So I was like, all right, sure, fine. You're right, So I finished the antibiotics, and I was like, all right, well, okay, I seem unscathed for the most part. Towards the end of my antibiotics, and I didn't even take the full dose. I just, I talked to a few different people and got some opinions. No one could really tell me one way or the other for legal reasons, but I kind of ended up making a decision that felt good for me of how much to take. So I didn't take the full round. But by the end, I had a little yeast infection, which is, very common. And we're going to, as we kind of get into the meat of this episode, there's a reason why you are very prone to getting a yeast infection after having been on antibiotics. So I had that, and then I was like, all right, well, if this is the worst of it, that's fine. And then a week after I finished, I started getting constipated, and I wasn't going to the bathroom like I normally go. Like, I am someone who my bowel movements are like clockwork. I get up within 30 minutes or so of being awake. I have a bowel movement. It's, good size bowel movement. And then usually another hour or two later, I have another one, and then I'll have a third one usually in the evening. And I was having one, and it wasn't even a lot. And I'm like, I'm someone who eats a ton of fiber between all the fruit that I'm eating and the vegetables and everything. Like, I eat so much fiber, and I wasn't eliminating to the same level that my body was used to eliminating. And so I started getting really uncomfortable. I was getting some bloating, and I was like, no, like, this is not going to happen. So of course I kind of doubled down on doing certain things. I went and saw Dr. Danny, who was on my podcast a few episodes ago. And she worked on some points like my ileocecal valve and colon point and that kind of thing to try to help me, help everything relax so I could go to the bathroom. But it's just crazy what a little bit of antibiotics can really do to the balance of your gut. Because like I said, my digestion was great. And so having to come back for that has been really, really frustrating. Although I guess it's given me this new reminder of people who are in situations like this where they are struggling with some digestive issues, because it's been a while since I have, gone through this. So I guess it's a little bit better of a reminder. I can, re-empathize with people. Not that I haven't been able to, because I have been through this all before. But yeah, so that's kind of what went on, and what, obviously inspired me to do this, this episode all about antibiotics. Because I think the intention behind antibiotics was really good. And of course, it's gotten to this place where they're synthetic now, and yeah, so kind of we're gonna jump into that. So as far as like the history of antibiotics go, ancient civilizations knew that various plants had antibacterial properties. Nature does provide us with natural antibiotics. Garlic. Aloe vera is a natural antibiotic. There are so many things that have antibiotic properties. And so this is what was used by ancient civilizations. And, I've gotten in a back and forth with friends before about how, natural antibiotics don't really work. But it's like, if they didn't work, human beings would not be here today. Like, there were things in nature that helped us when we were sick. Natural antibiotics being one of them. And then in the 19th century, Louis Pasteur And Joseph Lister noted that microorganisms produce substances that inhibited bacterial growth. In 1928, Alexander Fleming accidentally discovered penicillin while studying Staphylococcus bacteria. He noticed that the mold growing in the petri dish was killing the bacteria. And so then Fleming and his colleagues purified and characterized penicillin, laying the foundation for modern antibiotic research. In the 1940s and 50s, there was a surge in antibiotic discovery. This was known as the Golden Age. Streptomycin, tetracycline, chloramphenicol. Some of these are so hard to say. Chloramphenicol and erythromycin were among many of the antibiotics isolated during this period. These antibiotics revolutionized medical treatment, drastically reducing the mortality rates of bacterial infections. Today, scientists develop synthetic antibiotics. So they weren't always synthetic. Semi-synthetic antibiotics such as ampicillin and cephalosporin were modified versions of natural antibiotics with improved properties. The development of new synthetic antibiotics continued throughout the 20th century, expanding the range of available treatment. So obviously, I could see antibiotics very early on when they're not synthetic. They are from these, microorganisms being maybe a little bit better for us than the synthetic ones that we have today. There's kind of a reason for that, which we're going to get into. And so, the dangers of antibiotics. Antibiotics are toxic in many ways. Antibiotics do contain toxic heavy metals like arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury. And it's either from impurities from the manufacturing process or as active components in older formulations. These may not be used as much because there were some arsenic-based antibiotics. I don't think there are today, but a lot of times there are impurities from the manufacturing process, and that's what causes arsenic, lead, cadmium, and mercury to be in them. They're manufacturing such a high amount of antibiotics, so there will be impurities. And again, they usually are heavy metals. Certain antibiotics, such as tetracyclines and fluoroquinolones, may contribute to heavy metal accumulation in the body. And again, remember, heavy metals can accumulate and start to calcify in the body. So that's why you need to be detoxing metals fairly regularly, or at least have your drainage pathways open. That helps with detoxification. So your lymphatic drainage pathways. Many antibiotics are synthesized using petrochemical derivatives. So these are byproducts of crude oil processing. A lot of people don't know this. There are petrochemicals in your antibiotics. And this includes benzene, toluene, and xylene. This is one of the reasons why antibiotics is harsh on the liver, because you have petrochemicals and then metals in there. Again, there's a time and place for antibiotics, but you should be aware of all of the aspects of them because it's really important. So let's get into some of the side effects of antibiotics. So many antibiotics cause side effects that range from mild rashes to severe allergic reactions. Obviously, you can be allergic to antibiotics. So, we're not going to necessarily talk about the severe allergic reactions, but we'll talk about kind of the mild to moderate side effects. So certain antibiotics can cause kidney damage, and some can cause hearing loss as well. Again, a lot of these are, kind of a person by person basis, but it's important to know. A lot of times people are like, oh my gosh, I had no idea antibiotics could cause that. Because how often is your doctor telling you, oh, just watch out for these things? Okay, maybe, kidney damage isn't super, common, but we all have a right to know. And let's face it, are we really sitting down and reading our package inserts or whatever to medications we take? Probably not. And then fluoroquinolones have been linked to tendon ruptures, nerve damage, and psychiatric effects. The impact of antibiotics on the environment. Antibiotic production releases pollutants, including heavy metals and petrochemical waste, into waterways, especially areas with poor regulation. So depending where they're, manufactured, we have, as we learned on my last episode with my uncle, there's so much regulation, especially in California, but in most of the United States, as far as environment goes. I don't think that that's probably happening here, but let's face it, a lot of our medications are produced in China and other countries. So these heavy metals and petrochemical waste, will go into waterways. And then unused antibiotics, they end up entering sewage systems and contribute to antibiotic resistance in the environment. And so, we are aware of antibiotic resistant bacteria strains in people from taking too many antibiotics. But what about the environment? What about when they are disposed? And so that's something to keep in mind. We don't often think about that. And then long-term impact of antibiotics. Some antibiotics, especially broad spectrum ones, have been linked to increased risk of cancer, metabolic disorders, and neurological problems due to their effects on the microbiome and the mitochondrial function. And this is huge because our gut is like our second brain. It has such an impact on our mental health. And then think about how many people have probably been on antibiotics a bunch and then have mental health problems later in life. I think about my brother. He was vaccine injured as a kid because they gave him way too many vaccines at one time. And he ended up dealing with anxiety issues and then had to be on anxiety medication. And so there's definitely a correlation there. Well, I guess I left out the antibiotic part. So he was vaccine injured. He ended up having tons of ear infection, tubes in his ears twice, which we know a lot of, vaccine injured kids end up having, recurring ear infections and other type of infections. And so being on antibiotics that much as a kid totally damaged his gut and his immune system. And so then it's not super shocking that then a kid like that would end up with mental health issues as they start to get older. And who's really sitting out there letting parents know this, or, just bringing awareness? Not too many people. And so many people take antibiotics. Like, again, I have friends who take recurring antibiotics and who are on medication for ADHD, depression, anxiety. It's like, oh my gosh, the amount of people, even just in general, who take daily prescription medications for their mental health or for something. And again, I know people need it, but we shouldn't look at it as a permanent thing. It should be something like, oh, you know what? I need this medication right now to deal with something that's going on. I need it to help me get XYZ under control, right? But we turn to it as it's just something you take. It's just something you do. Oh, I drink my water every morning and I take my antidepressant every morning. And we're starting to even uncover like the long-term effects of SSRIs. And so every pharmaceutical drug has a long-term impact on our actual health. And I think about how many people there are out there who have been on, I guess I'm kind of, sidebarring a little bit away from antibiotics and to like anxiety and depression medications, but how many people have been on these for most of their lives and don't even know how to self-regulate their own emotions and their own brain. I came across a video on like my Explore page of this guy. I think he was like my age, like 30, 31, and he is getting off of his antidepressants after, I think he said, 20 years. So he then started them at 10 years old. And he's talking about how he's having to learn how to do these things for the first time, regulate certain things for the first time, because he just never had to do it. He was on a medication. His brain never had to learn. And I sent it to my brother because my brother is 22, about to be 22, and is getting off of his anxiety medication for the first time since being on it in 5th grade. I forget how old he was at that age, but for a long time. And our brain fully develops at 25. And so he and I have the same primary care physician. And he was saying that, you need to get off of this. Like, your brain needs to fully develop without the interference of some type of drug in your system. And again, how many doctors are sitting there with their patients telling them that they need to do this? None of them. And most of them leave it to the psychiatrist or whoever prescribed it, because most people's primary care physician aren't the actual prescribing physician for the SSRIs or whatever it is. And so, yeah, we don't think about the long-term effects. I do think that in the next, 10 to 20 years, there will be so much, research, published research out there about the long-term effects of SSRIs. And I think people will start to change their tune and start to realize that we need to prescribe other things for people before prescribing SSRIs. Again, are there going to be cases of people who absolutely need them? Yes, there will always be that. But the vast majority of people who are prescribed these meds, I don't think need them. They probably need to get in the sun more. They probably need to go for a walk in nature. There's so many things that you can do before prescribing that. Same thing with antibiotics. There's so many things that you could do for your health before needing them, especially recurring antibiotic prescriptions. So let's get back to antibiotics. And so also research as far as antibiotics go, research suggests that frequent antibiotic use in childhood may be linked to higher risk of asthma, allergies, and autoimmune diseases later in life. So again, using my brother as an example, he had a lot of frequent antibiotic use in childhood, and he does in fact have asthma, and he has a ton of allergies too. Allergies to lots of nuts and to even other foods. It's crazy that one person can have that many things. And so again, when your microbiome gets all messed up, it is the foundation for so many things in our health. So the impact of the gut on antibiotics, or the impact of antibiotics on the gut. Antibiotics, they wipe out all of the good and bacteria throughout our entire digestive system. So if you saw my post on social media that I did about antibiotics, I compared it to a wildfire, which I posted this post like a few days before the LA fires, which was interesting. And, you know, I've kind of been like, I started a Substack. I've posted like 2 little entries on Substack. I did write a Substack about my antibiotic, story and everything, because it was like, wow, there was this weird juxtaposition. I was burning down all the gut in my microbiome while LA was burning. Because antibiotics they are like a wildfire to your gut flora. They burn everything down in its path, good or bad. It cannot differentiate. It burns down everything. And that's the thing. Sometimes we like to think that our body can recognize the difference between like, oh, this is an antibiotic, it's helping me, or that, drugs are smart and it's like they can tell our body, I'm here to help you, don't treat me as something toxic. But that's not how it works. Like our liver looks at prescription meds is the same as recreational drugs. Like our liver processes it the same. Our liver does not like to process any type of medication, recreational or prescription. So anyway, antibiotics, they wipe out everything, good and bad. And this includes throughout our whole digestive system. So that includes your mouth. Our mouth is part of our digestive system. It is actually the first step in our digestive system, and we have bacteria in our mouth. And so it wipes that out. It also kills the good and bad bacteria in the vagina and on your skin. Again, going back to the yeast infection, that's why many women do get yeast infections after having been on antibiotics, because it changes the bacteria balance there as well. And so antibiotics, again, they're killing the good and the bad. So they leave you with gut dysbiosis, which makes you vulnerable to other bacteria, to parasites, to viruses, and to yeasts. And so that's kind of what I'm dealing with now. I'm definitely dealing with some type of dysbiosis in my gut. I have been a little concerned that maybe there's some parasitic activity going on, because some of the symptoms I have seem to be like that. But I'm trying not to get ahead of myself. I'm trying just to resort back to the things that I know that my body likes, and just trying to be a little patient with myself. I'm trying to just do a bit of cleansing, having some all fruit days where I'm just eating all fruit. I haven't done an all juice day yet, but if I feel like I need it, I will. It's also kind of cold and been a little rainy right now. And so I have a harder time getting motivated to do an all juice day when it's rainy or cold. I can do all fruit because I can have fruit at room temp, and I'm just used to eating fruit. So that's not as hard for me, but to do an all juice day is a little bit hard when it's cold or rainy out. So we can talk a little bit about repairing your gut post antibiotics. So obviously the most important thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to basically replant your garden. So if you're a client of mine, you know how I talk about the gut. And so I compare the gut basically to a garden, right? So you have all these beautiful things growing in your garden, all these different vegetables and flowers and plants, and everything's lush and beautiful and just nice and peaceful and, again, flourishing. And then you take your antibiotics, everything's burnt to the ground. Now it looks ugly, nothing's there. You just have the soil. And so you have to clean everything up and start over. So you have probiotics and you have prebiotics. And a lot of times people get confused on between what the two are. So the probiotics, they're kind of like the seeds. You're going to go and you're going to replant a bunch of seeds in your garden. And then the prebiotics is the food for your seeds. So it's like watering your garden, fertilizing your garden. That's the prebiotics. And so you're going to want to plant all new seeds in your gut garden. And so I always recommend my clients to take 2 different types of probiotics, a regular probiotic and then a spore-based probiotic. So no matter what type of probiotic you take, first of all, you want to make sure it's a shelf-stable probiotic. If it is not shelf-stable, that means that the bacteria strains that they have packaged up in this probiotic capsule, they're probably dead, because they would either need to be refrigerated or they can't live that long in the capsule. And so you want to make sure it's shelf stable. And that's important. So you could take like a regular probiotic, make sure it's shelf stable. And then you're going to want to take a spore-based probiotic. So spore-based probiotics are strands of bacteria that are found in the soil, and they typically have a longer lifespan in the gut. They do die off after antibiotics, and they are the hardest ones to replace because they have lived in our small intestine for so long. And that's what always gets me is the spore-based probiotics. So spore-based probiotics probably been there since you were a kid. I mean, most people today probably don't have any spore-based probiotics in their gut from when they were kids because of the amount that we all take antibiotics. They've probably all been killed. And I know I certainly don't have any because of how long I was on antibiotics for Lyme disease. So I know that any gut bacteria I had from childhood is just gone. It's not there. And so spore-based probiotics, a nice thing about them is they don't need to be refrigerated. Sometimes normal ones don't. But spore-based probiotics, they're great. There's two that I like. I like Megaspore and I like this one. It's called Just Thrive. Either one is great. I will say spore-based probiotics tend to be pricier than normal probiotics. But if you've just taken antibiotics, I would try to prioritize spore-based probiotics. I know for me right now, I am taking 2 different kinds of antibiotics. And I actually am taking both of those spore-based probiotics, but I'm alternating. So one day I'm doing one day I'm doing 2. Or the other. I'm just trying to, again, get as much bacteria variety back in my gut as I can because a strong gut, a strong microbiome has a wide diversity of bacteria in there. So I'm trying to basically replant everything. Another great source of probiotics is fresh living foods. So uncooked fruits and vegetables do in fact contain probiotics on their surfaces. If you have access to an organic farm, like a farmer's market, or you have a garden at home, eat the vegetables from those sources because they have elevated levels of probiotics on their surfaces. And the main thing is like ideally you wouldn't wash them. Maybe you would wipe them a little bit or give them a light rinse. And the only way that you would be able to do that is if you know the sources and that there are no toxins on them that can make you sick, no pesticides or anything like that. Otherwise, you're not going to want to trust. You're going to want to make sure that you're thoroughly washing everything with no soap or with soap. But if you know the source, if you know the farmer, or if you grew it yourself, then you don't need to use any soap. Just again, a light rinse or like a wipe or something, like with a towel. And then, like for example, a great example is like if you pick a piece of kale from the ground, there's like this little film around it. And that's where there's elevated levels of little microorganisms that are naturally occurring probiotics. And so these are great for immune health and for digestion. And a lot of, if you've ever grown a garden yourself, when you pick things, you'll notice that there is a natural film on a lot of produce. And that is, again, beneficial bacteria that actually protects the produce. It's great for our gut and it protects the produce. So there's like a nice little mutual benefit there. But that doesn't really happen from store-bought produce. The number one top source of probiotics in food would be sprouts. Really any type of sprouts, but like alfalfa sprouts, broccoli sprouts, clover sprouts, fenugreek, lentil, mustard, sunflower, kale. Any type of sprouts are going to be great. And they're little living micro gardens. Like there's so much nutrients in sprouts. And I know broccoli sprouts are pretty trendy right now, so you're probably familiar with that. But literally any type of sprouts. So like right now, I'm literally just eating sprouts by the handfuls. They're kind of good. They're crunchy. I'm trying to add them on anything I can. They're filled with beneficial bacteria. And they're also easy to grow if you wanted to grow them yourself. It is not that hard. I used to be really into growing them myself. I haven't in the last couple of years, and I've been wanting to get back into it. I just don't have a lot of space in my kitchen, so I'm trying to figure out where I could put them so they're like out of the way. I have like a little sun window, but that's going to be too much sun that it will like fry the sprouts. So I'm like, okay, I have to figure out what I'm going to do. So obviously I kind of touched on it already, but the other way to repair your gut is eating lots of prebiotics. So again, this is like the food for the probiotics. It's the food for the seed, like the water, the fertilizer. And so every raw piece of produce that you eat is a prebiotic. It will feed the good bacteria in your gut. And only the good bacteria in the gut eats prebiotics we consume, which makes them great at helping to diminish the presence of bad bacteria. Bad bacteria does not thrive on prebiotics in the same way that the good bacteria does. Bad bacteria typically thrives on, usually processed seafood ingredients, things like processed sugar, that kind of thing. Kombucha is one that's terrible, which is, I know, always shocking. And I'm going to sidebar and actually talk about kombucha, because it's always kind of very interesting because people think it's really good for the gut. And then the last thing that is great for repairing your gut after antibiotics is aloe vera. It really helps to, can kill bad stuff. And it also helps with having good bowel movements. And when I say aloe vera, you would want to eat the inner gel. I would buy the fresh aloe vera leaves, cut a piece off, cut off the outer green skin, and you eat the inside. And the texture is very interesting, but it is really helpful. And so I've been eating a lot of aloe vera lately. You get used to the texture. I always tell my clients, I'm hesitant to tell you this because I don't want you to go into it thinking this. But it's kind of like snot. It's like if you were to, like, I don't know, if you've ever been sick and you are coughing a bunch and you cough up phlegm and you have this, that's kind of what it's like, which is super gross, but it's good for you and you get over it. I got over it very quickly and now I eat aloe vera like nothing. But so some things to avoid after having antibiotics would basically be any processed foods. Don't eat processed foods. I would even be cautious as to eating too much fats after antibiotics. I would be cautious with eating meat after antibiotics. Obviously, make sure if you're gonna eat meat, it's high quality meat. But again, because you're gonna be really focusing on regrowing your gut garden, I would just try to fill your diet with as many fruits and vegetables as humanly possible as you can eat. Obviously, alcohol is something you're going to want to avoid after. That's not great for gut health. Any type of seed oil won't be great either. And then kombucha. Kombucha is something that you would also want to avoid. And so why do you want to avoid kombucha? Because everyone's like, oh my gosh, kombucha is so good. So kombucha contains biofilm. And so it's made from fermenting tea with what's called your SCOBY, which is a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, which I hate. Yeast just grosses me out. I know you need yeast for sourdough, but that's why I really don't even eat sourdough. Oh, I don't eat sourdough at all because the yeast grosses me out. When I eat bread, the bread that I get is yeast-free bread. There's something about it that grosses me out. And I know some people argue that, yeast can be beneficial, but my digestive system doesn't like it. So anyway, the biofilm that is in the SCOBY is it harbors harmful bacteria, and molds usually, especially if it's not properly maintained, which a lot of people just have them on their kitchen counters. And I have a friend, or used to have a friend, not really a friend anymore, but who made kombucha all the time and had it sitting on her counter. It's just gross. And what's ironic, as we talk more about kombucha, you'll put the pieces of the puzzle together, but she always had UTIs, always had urinary tract infections, other infections, was always on antibiotics. And the whole time I was like, you're literally drinking bacteria. You are putting bacteria in your body. No wonder you're having infections all the time and you need to be on antibiotics. And she's like, oh, I'm drinking my kombucha because it's helping my gut. But I'm like, but you're still on antibiotics, so clearly it's not helping. So yeah, I don't recommend kombucha to my clients. And so also the so biofilm, if it's the SCOBY, it can be contaminated, especially, if it's not handled properly, and it can lead to some type of foodborne illness. Also, the acidic environment that it's in can usually prevents dangerous pathogens because it's acidic. But if it's not properly fermented or the acidity is not high enough, it can allow harmful microbes to grow. And so I don't think a lot of people are testing the acidity to make sure that it's safe. Again, yeah, and also that does typically apply to if you're doing it yourself, which I know a lot of people do. I don't think that applies as much if you're buying it, but still, all SCOBYs, whether it's the store bought or you're doing it yourself, there's biofilm in kombucha, regardless. So kombucha is very highly acidic, and the pH is around 2.5 to 3.5, which can erode your tooth enamel over time. And regular consumption of kombucha without rinsing or drinking may increase the risk of cavities or tooth sensitivity. And also, our bodies do not like to be acidic. Our bodies like to be as alkaline as possible. And anytime we're drinking something that's acidic, our stomach acid has to compromise and rebalance. And so, yeah, it just seems kind of like a waste to me. And then also kombucha, there's possible lead and heavy metal contamination in it as well. Brewing kombucha in a ceramic, lead glazed, or, you know, even if it's like an improperly sealed container, can leach toxic heavy metals into the drink. So I will say, in the sake of like my friend, it was in a glass jar, so that's great. But then it's like the sun is shining on it, and then is that growing back more like bacteria? Yeah. So anyways, there's also digestive issues and bloating. So kombucha is rich in probiotics. I'm going to put probiotics in air quotes, which can be beneficial, but may cause gas and bloating, because of the carbon dioxide from the fermentation. And it also can create a histamine intolerance, or histamine intolerance reactions in some individuals. Again, because sometimes the bacteria in it is not good bacteria. So you're actually just drinking something that's not great for you. And, you know, it could cause liver toxicity depending how, you know, sensitive your liver is. And the combination of the acids and the fermentation byproducts, it might stress the liver too in some individuals. So, you know, and the liver is key in detoxing. Again, your lymph, your kidneys, your liver, those three things, you don't want to mess around with those. They are super important in detoxing, and detoxing is such a huge part of our health because we're bombarded with so many toxins in the environment that we can't even control. Why would you want to put something into your body that you can control that's just going to like make that much harder? And the biggest thing with kombucha, which again, a lot of people don't know, if you are immunocompromised in any way, you know, whether you have reoccurring UTI infections like my friend, or you know, you have something going on, digestive problems, Lyme disease, maybe you have an autoimmune disorder, or, you know, you're anything. You shouldn't drink kombucha because your body probably cannot handle if there's any type of imbalance coming into you because of that. Again, acidity. And again, if you're immunocompromised and your body's trying to heal, acidity will not help you heal. Our body needs to be in an alkaline state to heal. So all the more reason why, if you're immunocompromised, not to have kombucha. And individuals who are prone to infections should not have it due to the harmful bacteria and the mold that is most likely in the kombucha. So that's my little kombucha sidebar spiel, because people love their kombucha, and it's a question I get from clients all the time. What do you think of kombucha? What do you think of kombucha? And so if you are not immunocompromised in any way, and you're perfectly healthy and you have no gut problems, and you enjoy drinking kombucha once in a while, great. Then you know what, you're probably fine, and I'm not talking to you. I still would say I wouldn't drink it every day if you're totally healthy, because then that could create problems. But if you are dealing with health issues or any type of digestive issue, kombucha is not it. It's not. Eat some sprouts instead. Like, there are other things that you can do. Make yourself a nice little like mocktail or something else at home. Don't do kombucha. Just, yeah. And you know, with like the sourdough yeast thing, again, I'm not well versed in making sourdough, so this might not be right. But I want to say like my logical thinking, my intuition thinks too that with people and their sourdough starters, if you're pulling from the same starter all the time, like how is that yeast not getting moldy or not getting, you know, filling with bad bacteria? That's what concerns me a little bit about sourdough, although I know then you're cooking it, so at least I guess you're killing the bacteria, but the mold would still be present. And so that's what concerns me too about some of this homemade sourdough making. And just even for me personally, fermentation as a whole grosses me out. Obviously people swear by fermented foods. You know, there was a time in human history where we needed fermented foods for survival, because we needed to, you know, can things, ferment things to get through the winter months. But there's not really like a need for that in society today. And fermenting just grosses me out, because if you let something ferment too long, it's rotten, it's bad, or, you know, it turns to like alcohol, which in a way is bad, right? Like alcohol is poison. So if you let something ferment too long and it has that little alcohol taste or smell to it, then it's rotten. It's not good for you anymore. And so fermenting is just halfway to being rotten. It's like right in this middle stage. And so I'm like, why would you why would you want to consume that? And again, more beneficial bacteria. But wouldn't you just want the life-giving bacteria that's in something like sprouts? Like, I'm all about, okay, how much life can I consume in my food? I want things that are living, fruits, vegetables, sprouts. And so to me, with fermentation being on its way to being rotten and to being dead, obviously there's bacteria there, but I just don't think the bacteria present is life-giving enough. It's not good enough bacteria. And I do know that there's some science to support that. I know that there's a lot of conflicting science on that. But where I've kind of landed in with my, in my own conclusion is that fermentation is just not worth it. And this is also coming from someone who has been severely compromised, who has had severely compromised gut health. Because I tried, I did the fermented vegetables and it just didn't seem to help. Not in the same way that like fresh fruits and vegetables and fresh juice and sprouts and stuff like that did. And that just felt better in my stomach too. So that's also my little 2 cents on fermentation. But yeah, so antibiotics. So, there's so many things that you can do to avoid having to get there. Again, if you're getting sick, if you feel like you're getting sick, start eating raw garlic, start eating honey. Honey has antibiotic properties, raw honey. There's so many things you can do when you start feeling like you're getting sick. Obviously, yeah, you want to try to catch it as early as you can, because then the natural things do work better the earlier you catch it. And that's where being in tune with your body is very important. You need to know when you start to feel slightly off, when you start to feel a little tired and it's like, ooh, something might be going on. Or again, also, if you've been around someone who's been sick, if you're like, oh, I was just around my brother, my mom, my friend, and they were sick, start eating some raw garlic. Yes, eating raw garlic. Don't take the capsules. Don't take garlic capsules. I mean, I don't think they're bad for you, but you want it to be as living as possible. Eat the raw clove of garlic. Mix it in some raw honey if you want. Mix it in a salad if you want, or a salad dressing or something. Personally, I just chop mine up. I mix it with some raw honey and I just eat it by the spoonful. It's easy. It goes down easy. It's really not that bad. You get used to it. And that's the thing with most of these holistic things, you get used to, like the aloe vera, you get used to it. The more you do it, it just becomes normal. I think, again, we don't like discomfort. We do not like discomfort, and we don't like to have to push through even eating something that's not great, that doesn't taste the best. And again, when you're eating raw garlic or you're having aloe vera, it's medicine. In that moment, it is medicine. So it's not necessarily meant to be delicious, like eating, a bowl of melon or watermelon or, having cherries or something. This is something that's like serving a purpose. And even if you think about it, a lot of like herbal tinctures don't taste that great. They're not appetizing, but they serve a purpose. And so, just know that the garlic or the aloe vera, it's serving a purpose for your health. And just, also don't beat yourself up if you have to be on antibiotics every once in a while, because I was beating myself up about that. I had to be on them and I hadn't had to be on them in so long. And I did go through this little moment of feeling a bit like a failure. But don't, like, again, we are all human and things happen. But like I said, you don't want to have to be on them over and over again. If that's happening, then get to the root cause of what is going on. Because you don't want to have to be on them too frequently. Like I said in my post that I did on Instagram about antibiotics, after one round of antibiotics, it takes your gut 2 years to fully recover. And obviously that's average. So it could take longer. It could take, it could be faster. And if you do all these things to help your gut, it could probably be less than 2 years. But still, the whole point of that is it takes a long time to recover from antibiotics after having been on them from so long. And I remember when I sat down and I was calculating, how many weeks were there in 10 months. And so, the way that I was on antibiotics during those 10 months, it was 2 weeks on, 1 week off. So in theory, I was like on 2 rounds a month, kind of a round and a half a month. But so for 10 months, it was essentially 15 to 20 rounds of antibiotics, and multiply that by 2 weeks. And then I was like, how many weeks were there in a year? It was going to take me something like 20 years for my gut to fully recover. And it's just sad. It's just so sad to think about. And anyone that I know that I think about being on antibiotics, it makes me sad when people I love also have to be on them. or when friends of mine have had to be on them over and over again. And it's funny, if you're in like the wellness space and you're like some type of healer, whether it's through nutrition or whatever you do, I don't think people talk about enough how if you're in the wellness space and you know a lot about wellness, and people in your circle, people you love, your family members, your friends, when you see them doing behaviors or eating foods that you know are so bad for them, it's hard not to want to say something. Early on, when I started learning about nutrition and doing all of this, you know, I just felt the need to share everything with all of my friends and family. Anytime it came up, I would tell them, oh, you shouldn't do this because of this, or this because of this. And I realized that it was unsolicited. They didn't ask for my advice. And so I've learned to, you know, pick and choose what I say, you know, maybe say a little tidbit. If they seem interested, I can share more. And it was really hard to kind of grasp that I was now on this level of health, this level of healing, that people around me weren't there. And I wanted to pull them with me. I wanted to bring them up to my level to understand the harm that they were doing to their health through taking antibiotics a bunch, through, you know, eating seed oils and, you know, whatever. I wanted to take them up on my level because I wanted them to feel as good as me, but I couldn't force them to. And so I've been doing a lot more inner work, realizing that if people around me don't want to meet me at that level of where I am health-wise or with whatever else I'm working on, I can't force them and I can't make them be there. And so I have to just learn how to, you know, how to be in their life without that, or have them be in my life without that. And again, I don't think we talk about that enough, because it's really painful in a lot of ways, because you see what's being done. Like I was out at dinner over the weekend with my family, and my mom was just, you know, literally just one day probably feeling good after having been sick for over a week with like the flu. And she ordered chicken enchiladas. And again, if you follow my work, you know that was like a big no-no. And not to mention the cheese, the dairy, which dairy is a mucus forming food. And if you are sick or recovering from being sick, you should not have dairy at all, let alone cheese, because cheese contains casomorphins and that's a whole thing. But that, and then chicken, which of all the meats, chicken is granted, chicken's better than like pork, but chicken is very high in linoleic acid. She should have, like, you know, I would have preferred to see her order something like steak. And then, you know, the restaurant most definitely used seed oils. And when your body is trying to recover, and again, you want your body in an alkaline state, meat is not alkaline, dairy is not alkaline. And then of course, the seed oils are not alkaline. So I was just like, you know, I kind of said a little bit, and I was getting a little mean about it. I will say that, you know, I was getting a little mean about it, because I'm sitting there thinking to myself, you're sick. You're not even 100%. And you're going to sit here and eat that, and you're going to have a margarita. And like, again, then people are like, oh, well, I just want to live a little XYZ. And it's like, okay, yeah, I have to remind myself that's their prerogative. If they want to do that, they can do that. But it's hurtful to see, because I know what that's doing to your body. I know what that's doing to your health, and it makes me sad. And so, I don't think that that's talked about enough. And maybe, you know, people listening, if you're the one in your family or the one in your friend group who's super into health and all of this stuff, that, you know, you probably can understand what that feels like, you know, that pain when you see people you love doing that, and the isolation too of no one quite being on that level either, because it is a little bit isolating. So yeah, that's my whole spiel on antibiotics and everything. I think I'll end it there. But thanks for listening. We kind of got off in the weeds on a few different topics today, but I think it was good. So like I said, like I mentioned earlier, next week on my podcast, I'm going to have my primary physician, Dr. Barkey. If you guys are curious about him, you can follow him on Instagram. His handle is RX for Liberty, and you can kind of get familiar with some of his work. He posts every day. He does like a morning message every day. So if you're wanting to kind of learn about him before I have him on, I would suggest to check him out, because it's going to be a good episode. I'm really excited. So as always, thank you for listening. And if you ever have any questions for me, or you want to work with me, you can send me an email at tdnutritioncoaching@gmail.com.